I'm gonna talk about some practical aspects of using NAMD in the form of modeling and parametrization of small molecules using two of the plugins that are present in BMD. So as we have been discussing during this workshop, BMD serves as a preparation and analysis tool for your molecular simulation that can be carried out with different programs. In this case, we're going to talk about how to solve some of the issues that might arise when working with new molecules. So if you think about it, the molecule that you want to simulate, let's say you're interested in simulating a new drug or a different type of mutation in your protein, that molecule must be present, the parameters must be present in the force field, right? And sometimes happens that you're like in the front end of research and your molecule has not been studied yet. So how do you do when that happens? How do you to basically create your own parameters for the force field? And that is valid in general in all type of MD engines. We're gonna give a few examples how to solve this when working with the Charles force field, which is the one that is used for NAMD, or the main force field for NAMD. Okay, so let me first introduce one of the tools in BMD. I think John already mentioned there are different plugins that help you prepare your system. One of these plugins is called Molefacture, which is a molecular builder and editor, meaning that you can design molecules from scratch based on pre-existing templates. You can use add different functional groups, common functional groups. There is a library for that. You can include your new groups in the library, so you can reutilize them. It has a built-in quick structure minimizer. So once you connect the atoms, you can run a minimizer either using the Charles force field by means of NAMD, or you can use the UFF force field in OpenBabel. And then once you have your structure, you can export this molecule into different file formats. For example, PSFPDB, which is the ones that are needed for NAMD, or you can use also other file formats. And the good thing is that since this is built into the plugin library of BMD, it interfaces with other plugins that are also helpful for preparation of for simulation. Meaning, for example, FFTK, which is the one that I'm going to talk about now, and other plugins like QuickMD and QM2. Okay, so this has been an effort developed in the last several years by Peter Fredolino initially, and then Joe Ribeiro, which is now in a Reutband company. So let me give you like a brief overview of Molefacture. You can play around with this in the afternoon session. It has is side by side to the OpenGL display of BMD. You can see the molecule. You have a table. You have a table of information of your system, the atom types, charges, and whatnot. You have a set of buttons where you can add or delete atoms, and other options to edit bonds and angles and so on and so forth. So let me show you this screencast where I start from scratch, creating a molecule, start from an independent fragment, and I change groups so that I create this molecule. Okay, I can quickly click and have a structure. Okay, so once you have this structure, you can export this, as I said, as a PSFPDB, and imagine that I want to simulate this. Okay, so now I need to make sure that I have all the parameters in the force field for this molecule. So let's go back to the force field terms in CHARM, which is analogous to other force fields. And the potential energy that you compute is a sum of different terms that comes from the bonds, angles and dihedrals, and some other connections. and also the non-bonded terms like the van der Waals or Lennard-Jones and the electrostatic parameters. Okay, so basically when you're talking about the parameters of the force field, when you're talking about this, actually what it appears here in bold red. Okay, so all these terms, yeah, for example, the force constant of each bond is this K here that modulates this harmonic, and the center of this harmonic is actually also a parameter for that bond. It's the bond length that is standard in the force field. And the same can be said by angles, dihedrons, and so on and so forth. So in this case, everything that is in red is from the force field, and everything that is in green comes from your trajectory or your PDV, the coordinates, the actual bond, the actual angle, and so on and so forth. Okay. So how can you get all these parameters? So usually you can start by checking if your molecule has some analogous molecule that, like, for example, a part of your molecule is similar to some other molecule that it has already been parameterized, and you can get all those parameters by analogy. Okay, you can use the general force field, the Charm General Force Field ZGNFF web server, which is interesting. I'm gonna show this in the afternoon session how to use it. Or if you cannot get any similar structures from your molecule, or I'm going to talk about when you need to skip this part and go further by developing your own parameters from quantum chemical calculations. Okay, so that is where this next plugin that I'm going to present, Force Field Toolkit, helps you to basically set up all the calculations that you need to do, and then get all the results from the calculations so that you can actually build your parameters. Okay, so let's do. Let's look at a little bit more in detail about, for example, what would you find in the parameter file? Okay, so the parameter file is a series of lines that basically, in the case where you have bonds, each line has the different atom types. For example, I have two simple examples of molecules or part of molecules here. For example, a benzene ring here, and we will have a line for each. For example, Ca. In this case, Ca means the aromatic carbon in the ring. So for each pair of atom types that are bonds, you need one line that has that information of the atom types and the force constant of the bond and the reference bond length, okay, to build this term in the force field. For example, in the water, we will have, this is the atom types of the tip 3P water, and you will need one single for each different type of bond. In the angle part of the parameter file, then the file is kind of like, okay, now I have 3 atom types. And for example, in this case would be Ca, 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 for example, and then the force constant of the bond and the angle, the reference angle, and in some cases you have an extra term, an extra harmonic called Urey-Bartley, and you have here the terms of that parameter for that harmonic. Okay, the same for the dihedral. So for each 4 atom types that are connected forming a dihedral, that is going to be incorporated in the force field and basically function, change your potential, then you need one line for each. For example, here we have a line for all the alpha carbons in the ring. Okay, and then we have another line that is 3 alpha carbons connected in a line with the hydrogen, and then another one that is basically hydrogen, carbon, carbon, hydrogen. Okay, these 3 are necessary. Okay, so let's do a simple example on how would you do about starting or confirming that your molecule of interest has the parameters necessary to run in the force field. Okay, so let's take an example. For this is a drug, a very famous drug, acetaminophen, also known as paracetamol. So it's a widely used medication to treat fever and pain. So let's go and do it as if you were to simulate this, let's say in a solution or in next to a protein. So what we will do is first we will check if there is an analogous molecule that is already parameterized. Okay, so in this case, we can split our molecule and, for example, make use of parts that are present in the force field. So, for example, this part here that I highlighted in red, it's very similar to the acetylated N-terminus patch that is present in the force field already. Okay, so if you go to the topology of the general force field, you will find there is a residue called ACE that is a patch that has these atom types. And since these atom types are already in the topology, then there will be parameters for all the connections between these atom types. Okay, so for example, I could use this, and I don't need to care about the bonds between anangles and dihedrals in this part of the molecule. The same can be said for the right side of the molecule, which I highlighted in blue. And if you look at this is a tyrosine side chain. So if you look at the topology of the residue tyrosine, then you will find here that this part that is also highlighted in this diagram is exactly the same as this part. Okay, so I could, in principle, take all the information from this part, the red patch, and some part of the tyrosine, and get that into my molecule. Yeah, we use the same atom types and define the same connections, and that will be in the force field already. So what happens with the remaining part that is in between these two groups? Okay, that is something that I probably need to reparameterize, because let's imagine that there is in the force field there are no atom types that are both connected to this side of the molecule, this acetylated patch, and this tyrosine ring. Okay, so for that we need a force field toolkit, and let's go over what this entails. So the force field toolkit has a very straightforward workflow where you can follow the workflow if you are working from scratch in this molecule, or if you're interested in a particular parameter that you want to refine, you can go and skip to that part of the workflow. Okay, so for example, you can access force field toolkit in the extensions menu in modeling, and this is the main window of FFTK, what we call it, and you can see that each tab has can be accessed independently. As I said, maybe you are interested in just optimizing the bonds and angles. Okay, the parameters for the bonds and angles. I'm not interested in the charge optimization, because you already did the optimization of the charge in another step. Okay, so you can go back and forth, but in principle, if you're starting from scratch, this is a workflow that you will do. You will first use the first tab to find the missing parameters that are not in the force field in the molecule. Then you will set up a geometry optimization in a quantum mechanics geometry optimization to update the coordinates, to optimize the coordinates that you created. And then you will have these 3 steps where you can progressively optimize the parameters. First, you will optimize the electrostatic Coulombic interaction, the charges. Then you will optimize the bond and angles, and finally the dihedrals. Okay, something that you cannot optimize with FFTK is what is called the Lennard-Jones or van der Waals parameters. Those are usually gathered from analogy. Okay, and at the end of the workflow, you get a parameter file for your molecule of interest, and you can use that with NAND to run your simulation. Okay, and of course, FFTK prepares these quantum mechanical simulations, but you need the quantum mechanical software to run those. And recently, we updated FFTK so that it can use both Gaussian, which is the most commonly used software for quantum mechanics, and also Orca, which is equally good, but has the advantage that it's free for academics, whereas Gaussian, you need to pay the license. Okay, so now you can use Orca without any issues. And also there is a development to extend this to use other softwares as well. So let me show you. Okay, so how would you choose which software you want to use? So this is relatively simple. There is a drop-down menu where you can choose the software, and you can see that depending on the software, the route, which is basically the commands or the keywords that you are referring to when you're running your simulation in that particular software, they change. Okay, those are the default values. The only thing that you need to pay attention is to change if you want to optimize the number of processors and memory for the machine that you want to run to. And in the case of your system, you need to be careful that you use the correct charge of your system and multiplicity. Okay, that's something that otherwise, if you run your simulation and ORCAD detects that that's not compatible with your system, it will give you an error and you need to come back and change that. Okay, so the way you do this, and then in this part is you select here in this entry the name of the file that you want to generate. You just click on this button, write QM software, and that then produces this input file. You need to run this externally, so you need to wait. Sometimes these calculations are long. For the geometry optimization, this is a somewhat medium accuracy method. MP2 is not the cheapest one, but it may take a while depending on the size of your molecule. And then once you have the results, then you go here to the bottom and load this output file of the result of the simulation, and you can write then your optimized geometry as a PDB, which is necessary for the next steps of your protocol. Okay. Any questions so far? Okay.
One question.
Yeah.
On the chart flow you show in previous slide, we should first select the missing parameters, find missing parameters. In the
Yes.
paracetamol, we have NH2, if I'm not mistaken. How can we define, or how can we tell the software that this part is missing, not the other part?
Right. So that is something that is automatically done in the FFTK in the first tab. So I'm not going to go into details now, but we're going to go over that during this in the next hands-on session this at 2 p.m. Okay.
Okay.
So, and there is also a tutorial that we're going to go over together, but in that tutorial you have all the information you need to get that part. Okay. I wanted to to show a little bit about how to select some of the new features that are how to select different software, and finally something that is a little bit more theoretical, maybe that it's also briefly mentioned in the tutorial, but just so that you know, there are different methods to optimize the charges of your molecule. And for example, the Amber's force field suggests you do an RSP fitting, which is basically you generate your charges so that it mimics the electrostatic potential found around the molecule. Whereas the charm force field recommends to use a method called water interaction, which is a different type of method in the sense that instead of calculating the whole electrostatic potential on your molecule, you sample each location of a donor or acceptor atom by probing it with a water molecule, explicit water molecule that you orient towards, and therefore then you're gonna mimic that. You're gonna select a charge that mimic the behavior of that interaction in the QM calculation. Okay, so basically, for FFTK allows you to do either of those. The tutorials and for the chance force field, we suggest you do the water interaction, which is a little bit more cumbersome because you need to generate many more files and run many more calculations, but it's not that complicated once you understand. Okay, so yeah, that's how you select the optimization method. And something that I wanted to mention is that recently there has been a new development in FFTK, given that the force fields, usually the force fields grow, they become more complex because they tend to first give you a good first approximation of some behaviors. And sometimes people found out, okay, this force field doesn't really work well for this type of molecules. So let's try to fix it and add more terms to the force field. So something that has been found in the literature is that usually these classical force fields do not behave that well for the particular type of interaction, which is called halogen bond, which is similar to the hydrogen bond. So here I have a schematic of the hydrogen bond, which is a hydrogen between two type of atoms that are electrodeficient and electronegative, with a particular electronegativity. So the same can be said for the halogen. For example, a fluorine atom can be also attracted to an electrodeficient atom and form kind of like a pseudo bond or long distance bond. For example, in this case, there is an example here that is a human aldose reductase inhibitor complex where this molecule, which is drug, interacts with the protein by means of this halogen bond. This bromine interacts with the oxygen atom. Okay, so this particular type of interactions, as I said, were not very well developed, described in the force field. So what they did is basically include in the force field some type of long pairs, which basically are like an additional particle that is present next to the halogen. So in this case, we have the structure of this molecule, and in this representation, we have now an additional extra particle that is charged, and adding that extra particle solves some of the flaws of this force field. But okay, if the force field grows by adding these extra particles, we need to be able to parameterize these particles, right? We need to parameterize either the charge or the position of this particle with respect to the halogen. So now in FFTK, we can set up a workflow to parameterize these extra particles that solve the interaction, this particular interaction, which is the halogen bond. Okay. So I think this paper has already published. I need to update this reference. But yes, the idea is that this is the force fields are an ongoing work that are becoming more and more refined for certain interactions. They need to improve, and therefore, if the force field is improved, then you need to be able to continue having access to tools like FFTK to improve this force field. Okay, the force parameters. Okay, so I would like to thank you guys for your attention, and I think we are like right on time. So let's do. Are there any questions for this part of the session? Okay, so as I said, during this afternoon, we are gonna have time to play with the FFTK. You can do the tutorial. We're gonna do the tutorial together, at least some of the parts. For example, the first part that identifies the missing parameters, and also some of the steps in the tutorial. If you're interested in doing simulations for a different molecule, like a novel molecule, a drug, for example, that's the first step you need to do, regardless of which MD engine are you using. If the molecule is not in the force field, then that's the first step you need to do. Okay.
One quick question. Is there any tool for parameterized polymers? Not the whole polymer, not the whole polymer. We have a head, a repetitive unit, and the tail, for example. Is there any tool that we could parameterize each unit and stick them together at the end?
So the sticking together the units is not a problem, because as I show you in the example of acetaminophen, you can get parts parameterization, but you can parameterize a part of your molecule and then use those parameters. Basically, the stitching together happens when the simulation is run. So NAMD looks, for example, okay, I need to compute the potential energy in this bond. I need to look at the table of parameters. If I found the parameters, that's fine. There's no problem. With respect to parameterizing polymers, I would say that that's a challenge. I could go with using force field toolkit. Like this toolkit can be done if you parameterize first the monomer, and then you may want to check if those parameters are change when you add, let's say, some contiguous monomers. Okay, for example, the charge. The charge, I would say, is the most important, one of the most important parameters. So as I said, you can splice your or just construct your monomer for the polymer, or the head or the tail, and parameterize only that part. Okay, and then maybe add for the head, for example, add another monomer, and now parameterize this part of the head, but in the presence of the monomer. Okay, the first monomer, and see if that changes. If that doesn't change, that's probably because your parameters are fine, I would say.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Hello.
Yeah.
The question is the parameterization of metal ion is also possible. For example, if Fe ion forms complex with tyrosine, then histidine, and with CO3, for example, CO3 ion. So is it possible to parameterization with the FFTK?
I would say that it is possible, but usually metal ions are like a different beast in the force field. They are like there is a large approximation that you're making when you are using ions in your simulation. Usually, most of the ions are not that relevant, but if you have metal ions like iron, then I would say you can do that, but the results you will get are a little bit complicated. What you can do is actually try to parameterize the whole metal with the coordination sphere. Okay, so in this case, for example, if you have a carbonate, different ions or different species coordinating the iron, then you can add all those together. And then what you're parameterizing is actually the iron in the presence of this coordination sphere. Okay. So that will be my approach to that.
Okay. Means hemoglobin iron is there, but it is chargeless. And when we use a metal ion, it has some charge. So that's why it's forming the complex. So you mean to say that we can form the complex and do right like that, right?
Yeah, because if you are interested in simulating the complex, you need to parameterize the iron in the presence of the in the complex.
Okay.
Yeah. And go ahead.
So means using some software like Gaussian or this VMD calculate itself. And if I calculate myself by using the Gaussian, so how can this parameters can be used directly by calculating differently, for example, not within the software? Is it possible to do it like that, or we have follow that procedure?
So the procedure is the following. So I'm going to go over that during the tutorial. But the idea is the following. You first create or isolate the part, let's say the iron with the heme and the ligand that you want to put there. Okay. Mm-hmm. So you create that. Then you build your files to run a quantum mechanical simulation, for example, with Gaussian.
Yes.
Okay. And then you come back to FFTK with the results of Gaussian. and load those results. And basically what FFTK does is try to find the charges that approximate the best what you saw in your quantum mechanical simulation. Okay. So that means that you will optimize or change the charge of iron, for example, and all the coordination sphere of iron if necessary, so that now the interaction inside the molecule is the same, or it mimics the same given the charge. Okay. So basically what it does is to, as I said, the water interaction, for example, what it does is positions water molecules around the complex and then gets you results. And then those results are used to mimic the quantum interaction with the classical force field. And that gives you the force, the new charges. Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much.
So yeah, it's a little bit complicated with metals, but it can be done. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, so any other questions? So we are in the Q&A session. We have David here as well, I think.
Excuse me, may I ask a question?
Yeah, Delar, go ahead.
Okay. Hello. Thanks for your nice presentation. My question is that for GeroMax, previously we used the ProdRG, I think this is the name, ProdRG server, to create a force field, to generate force field for small molecules. And after some time, there was a paper written by Justin Lemkool. In this paper, they showed that the charges that are generated with this ProdRG server are not very nice. And if we get the force field from ProdRG, we need to then optimize the charges that we did in as one of our studies. We did the charge optimization with through quantum mechanical calculations. I wanted to know that if you want to compare this FFTK, is it more powerful than something like ProdRG server? I don't know. And are the charges trustable? Thanks a lot.
So I'm not familiar with that server, but I would assume that that server is kind of like similar to another web server that is used quite commonly for the charm force field, which is called the CGNFF server. And what it does is basically gives you the charges that most resemble other examples. Okay, so it gives you, okay, I found in your molecule there is an oxygen bond to a carbon. Okay, in all my database I have all these oxygen and all of them have this charge, so I give you like the tentative charge that will the most correct one based on my database. But FFTK doesn't do that. FFTK actually goes there and gives you a charge that mimics the quantum mechanical calculation. So it's basically what you did in your studies to refine these charges. That is what FFTK provides, a protocol to do that.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah. So as I said, sometimes this is like the very first step in your research when you want to do a simulation. And it could be very complicated. So I understand if there are some questions. So if you're interested in using NAMD, I would suggest you do the FFTK tutorial, because it's even though it's a very simple example, it's parametrizing ethanol. It can be extended to other examples, like for example, like in the case of the monomer in the polymer, the iron heme complex, and so on and so forth. Yeah. But one more thing that I wanted to mention, and this is kind of like, I'm gonna repeat this in the afternoon when we go over the tutorial, is that sometimes you don't need to do all of this. Sometimes your molecule is not, I don't know, someone else already studied this molecule, so the force parameters are already in the force field. and therefore not everything is lost. Okay, so sometimes you need to try and see if your parameters are okay and you can use them. And that's something that we're going to discuss, how to tell if the parameters are fine or not. Okay.
Mariano, I have a question about Molefacture.
Yeah.
So when I create my own fragment or let's say a ligand, so I save the PDB, I want to use CGNFF to get a parameterize on my force field. So it also creates a topology file for me, Molefacture. One issue I noticed is that the atom name in the PDB file that has been stored is not unique, and CGNFF automatically reassigned the name to give them like a unique name. And when I return like a new PDB and force field parameter file, I cannot use the topology anymore because the name has been changed. Is there a way that we can like, assign a unique name in Molefacture?
Yeah, you can do that. There is in the table that has the information of the atoms, you can change you can edit the entry that corresponds to the atom type. However, I would say that, and this is something that we're going to discuss more in the afternoon, usually users shouldn't use the topology generated by Molefacture, because when you go to CGNFF, you already get the topology back. So you get the str file, which is the stream file, which has the topology and the parameters for your molecule. Yeah, so you don't need to use the topology. And that's something that, yes, you can change the names and the atom types of your molecule in Molefacture, but at the same time, I would say that's not necessary, because when you go and find the parameters in the CGNFF web server, if the parameters are there, then it's gonna overwrite the atom names and atom types that you gave.
Yeah.
So that's again, we can talk a little bit more about this in the afternoon.
Thanks.
Okay, so if there are no more questions, we can close this session. Do you have a question? If not, please lower your hand. Okay, so let's do the lunch break. Okay, and let's reconvene at 2 p.m. Central in an hour and 25 minutes when we go over both what was left from this the earlier session about advanced visualization, and also we can go over the force field toolkit tutorial. Okay, see you in an hour and 25 minutes.